All right.
Jason.
Friday. I can't help myself. I always call it Black Friday. It's not Black Friday. It's not a day
That's
of
that
sales.
consumer mindset, Jason.
Yes, I know. Jesus is about to flip my temple. Flip my table. So it's not Black Friday.
Nope.
It's Good Friday. It's Good Friday. And so I think this is such an interesting day because what would have been the worst Friday of all time for the disciples, now we look at a couple thousand years later and say, man, that was Good Friday. And so let's kind of talk about what happened on Good Friday and just kind of the significance of what it means to us now.
Well, I know we have a Good Friday service, and it's going to be a great time. Pastor Curtis, do you have any thoughts? Because I know that's something you kind of brought to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, my dad was a pastor, non-denominational church. So, we really just focused so heavily on Easter. And it wasn't until 2010 when I was a worship pastor in Washington, D.C., that I experienced my first ever Good Friday service. And it was at that service where, you're kind of like, all right, like there's going to be an up moment. There's going to be like a triumph. There's going to be victory. No, it was the heaviest service I'd ever experienced. And that following Easter was the most I'd ever celebrated.
Wow.
Because I let the weight of the cross just sink in. And I think we're so quick in our Western American mindsets of like victory, 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 prosperity, go, go, go. And it's like, man, do you understand the greatest sacrifice in history? Don't just glance over that.
Right.
Don't just read over it to get to the
Come on.
resurrection.
Yeah.
Like let that sit, because when you sit in the weight of the most like innocence on a cross, like literally the Son of God, Jesus was like, my God, like, why have you forsaken me? Like Jesus, his Father turns from him. Like that's how much sin Jesus had on him for us. And I think, there can never be enough songs about the cross. There can never be enough songs about the sacrifice. So yeah, Good Friday, we're going to sing about the cross. We're going to sing about the sacrifice, the greatest love, the greatest moment of love displayed. And I just can't wait to kind of see how that impacts our church and how it maybe changes the way that people go into Easter.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a quote that says that if we increase the cost of Christ, then we don't have to decrease the cost of discipleship. And so if we take a second to sit into the weight and the depth of the fact that God died for us,
Right.
for me, for you, and we just sit in that, then it makes all the other things that we kind of go, well, God, I wish you would, seem very petty in comparison.
Right. Yeah.
And not seem very petty, but actually be very petty.
Right. Yeah.
And it's such a not a dark day, but it's definitely one of those days that is worth thinking about and pondering on. If it's not for the cross, there is no resurrection. And so I think it is important that we take a second to really lean on it.
I think there's this moment, this spotlight right in the middle of Jesus being crucified, right? Because he's crucified between two criminals, two common criminals. And we get this really interesting spotlight on this one criminal who basically looks to Jesus in his last dying moments. And he just says, "You're Messiah. You are the one." And I think it messes with my theology because, I got rescued and saved when I was really young in the church. And so we talk about this sanctification of growing to become more like Christ. This man had literally no hope to grow to become more like Christ except for this simple grace that God was offering in the moment. It says, today you will be with me in paradise because of faith. Yeah. And I think to me, it brings us very, very simply back to why are we saved? How are we saved? It's not because of anything that I do, except for a simple receiving of this gift that Jesus offers.
Yeah.
Let me just say one more thing, because I think, as a worship guy, like like you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, the cross, like resurrection is what you want to sing about. But what's amazing to me, what happens on the cross, and we know this, is that this is the moment where the veil in the temple is torn.
It's good.
Yes.
This is the moment when Jesus gives up his breath, that God's presence and his people can forever be connected.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that worship is in one sentence, it's where God's presence and his people connect.
That's good.
And so I just think Good Friday it's the greatest funeral in the history of mankind. And I think we've got to allow ourselves to sit in that.
Yeah, I think it's our culture is such a feel good culture, and I even think now we are even more so kind of migrating from shame and guilt, which I think in a sense is really good. But I think when you think that nothing you do is ever bad, and there's nothing bad, there is no sin, there is no everything is this kind of subjective truth. I think what I love about a Good Friday service and just sitting on the Friday is just the fact that you realize that we aren't that good. Like we in fact, we are so like our sin separated us from God so that the King of the world had to die. Right. And just letting that marinate, it just makes you realize like how thankful you really are for the grace of God.
Yeah.
Like, wow. Like, I would say I have a pretty good self-esteem, but like I'm not worth that. I am not worth that. But just to realize, holy smokes, God did that for me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just like a quick death either. Like this painful, torturous death Jesus did for all of us, like with his people in mind. Like to me, if we can't sit in the uncomfortability of just the weight of that, like I think we miss, like you were saying, just the power and the beauty and the victory that comes on Sunday. Right. Like if you don't realize that if you're not bad, you don't realize that you're bad. If you don't realize that you're sinful, if you don't realize that you need a savior, then it's just some guy who died and resurrected.
Right.
But when you realize that was for me, to me, that like even kind of makes me feel emotional, just like that God would do that for me, somebody who is not perfect. And I just think it just brings the whole celebration of this Easter resurrection together. Yeah. And so that was our conversation about Holy Week. I don't know how we're supposed to end this.
Just like that.
Should we talk about Silent Saturday briefly? Okay. Let's talk about. Okay, so that's Friday.
Wow.
And then Saturday. So I think Saturday is. I'm not exactly sure what the name is, but Silent Saturday.
Silent Saturday sounds good.
And so let's talk about that Saturday, that next day. Maybe what were the disciples feeling? What is like kind of happening in the hearts and minds of the people in that time? And what does it mean for us?
Well, the story of Holy Week is essentially a story of expectation flipped upside its head. So it's the story of, hey, Jesus is coming in. He's supposed to be this mighty king. He's supposed to raise up an army, conquer the world. We'll all be with him. It's hundreds of years of expectation. And then Jesus actually completely flips it. He flips the table on it, does something completely different and fulfills God's original design. And I love even about Good Friday that it's on a hill that God made, on a tree that God planted, by the hands of people God created. God gave himself up to die. And so on a Saturday, I love that it's not I think there's some things that are instant miracles, but it does speak to the fact that God did want us to sit in that moment and really have a sober reminder of and get the heavenly perspective. And I do think one of the things that's amazing about it is it kind of removes all doubt. Like Jesus said, it is finished. It leaves no doubt that he was dead. Because I think if we'd take him off the cross and he'd come back, people could have been like, well, he didn't really die. He probably passed out.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This was like to say of Lazarus, he stinketh. Like it was, I don't know if he stinketh or not. It doesn't say that in the scriptures, but it leaves no doubt that he wasn't, the breath had left his body, right? That he was embalmed, that he was buried. And so when he comes in and is resurrected, we know this not just theologically or with a faith statement. The resurrection, we can then trust, is the most accurate historical event that's ever happened. And we can put our faith fully in Jesus through that work. Right. And it's not it's even not a faith thing at a certain point. It's a history thing. This happened, and how do we choose to respond to it?
Yeah, I think the thing about Saturday too is like the dust had settled. Saturday's got to feel like defeat for them. Okay, this is real now.
Yeah.
Like John was saying, he's dead.
Yeah.
Like he's dead. And so just to empathize, like on that Saturday, it's like the original shock of death is probably kind of worn off watching it. And and knowing that he's dead, and then it's like, what do we do from here? Like, it's settling in, and it's gotta feel like defeat.
I think what's interesting, it's Saturday, right? So it's Sabbath. So the Jewish people literally are doing nothing.
Right.
And I think
Wow.
I think that's significant in the Jewish calendar because the day of Sabbath is a day of rest. And I think about it because we help people when they lose a loved one. Saturday is kind of the day after mourning. And so there's certainly mourning, but there's this numbness that you'll see people kind of go through of like what just happened, and it's almost like you've run out of tears, but they don't even have the ability to go and like distract themselves through work. And how about you? When I'm going through a rough time, a difficult season, I love work because work is a great distraction. I can focus on what did I produce with my hands. But I think the significant for me is that we can rest in knowing Jesus did it all. And so it is silent, but like to know that you can rest knowing Jesus paid it all. It's done. It's taken care of. There's nothing I add to my salvation.
Yeah, something too. 2 quick thoughts. One, I love that the work of the cross is complete, and so even without the resurrection, maybe this is theological blasphemy. Somebody throw something at me, but even without the work of the resurrection, the greatest victory that ever happened had happened already on Friday.
Right.
So sometimes even when you don't feel it, God has already done more than enough.
Right.
Even when you don't perceive it, even when you feel defeated, God's work still already made a way. And even on that Saturday, there was a new paradigm, a new kingdom established, a new victory, and God would seal it and bring it to life through resurrection. But they had already been redeemed by belief through the cross. And the other part that John was mentioning on Saturday is, I think, even to go back to how God created the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested. And I wonder if on that first Saturday that ever was, as God is resting and thinking of all his creation, looking at Adam and Eve, he knew thousands of years later, there's going to be a Saturday where I lay my son to death. I wonder if God mourned on Silent Saturday.
Wow.
Knowing that for that season he was separate from his son, and knowing that every Sabbath beforehand he knew this moment of death and separation was coming.
Right.
And he established it as a covenant for his people so that they would know, hey, on this day we rest and we ponder and we remember and we are grateful, not for our effort, because we will never be good enough to, but because of what I will do for you.
Right.
Isn't that nuts? I just think that's amazing.
Yeah. I just think Saturday is a perfect representation of what can happen in our lives and does happen in all of our lives. I think we can all probably relate to a time in our life or a circumstance in our life where we felt the defeat. We felt the sting. We felt the loss. And so when I think about the disciples, I can think about specific times in my life where maybe I've felt defeated and I felt like all hope was lost. But I love this part about following Jesus is that there is a Sunday coming. Right? Like no matter how dark your Saturday is, no matter how hopeless you feel right now, the hope of Jesus is that Sunday is coming. And so I don't know if you're listening right now or you're watching right now and you're in a Saturday moment. You feel like you are defeated, the circumstance, the thing that you thought that was going to work out a different way, the circumstance didn't end up how you wanted it to. The hope of Jesus is that Saturday turns into Sunday, death turns into resurrection, defeat turns into victory. Yeah, man. And I think that is the hope of the Easter story. That is the hope of our humanity. And so if you're in a Saturday season right now, Sunday's coming.
That's right.